We shall revisit an important debate going on in our state house as we speak. Welcome to My State of Mind. I am Dan York. Tonight is Friday, March 6th. We are not here. What? We're not here. I'm not going to give you a rundown. If you watch the show regularly, and I hope you do, I'm not going to run down the list of the issues today because we recorded this program last Friday due to some production scheduling time. But I think you're going to find, and we're going to do more and more of this on Fridays, I think. We're going to have some folks come in and debate key issues that are important to our community, our lifestyle, our taxation, our this, our that. There's plenty of them out there, right? And of course, I promised you that I would bring back both of the gentlemen that are here tonight to talk about the legislation that's been proposed to upgrade the penalty from misdemeanor to felony for hanging out on the highway trying to make a point. Now, here's some of the video, as you've seen, I'm sure often at the protest in Providence back after the Ferguson incident. It was followed not too soon thereafter in Boston on Route 93. And since then, both Steve Ahlquist and Senator Lou Raptakis have been in to talk about it, and they've been kind enough to agree to come in and talk to each other about it. Steve, welcome. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Steve's a writer, and most notably when it comes to public stuff, you can find him on rifuture.org. And Senator Lou Raptakis is a longtime senator, took a little break, came back, still runs his business in Coventry, didn't bring any pizza, so he's already in the hole with us. Steve's mad, Jess is mad, I'm mad, we're all mad, so.
Rain check.
Come on, man.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to have you here. So when we last left this saga, you were talking to me about the language you wanted to put into your version of the Senate bill that would raise the misdemeanor to felony. Before Steve gets into it with you, update me as to what this bill proposal actually says.
Right now, in its current form, it calls for a felony first offense, and also takes in consideration of anyone being hurt or harmed. For example, someone's on their way to the hospital, they have a heart attack, they don't make it to the hospital, and death resulting. It's a strong, strong message to send, and the bill really calls for some strong punishment. And again, in the General Assembly, we have another 37 colleagues of mine and another 75 members of the House and the governor who all have to agree in some sort of language of legislation. I mean, we did have a hearing last Tuesday in the Senate side. The House did have their hearing on two bills by Representative Hall and Representative Canero, two different versions of the bill. And my consensus is that, look, we're going to have to sit down and figure out what's the best piece of legislation that we can work out that can pass the General Assembly, get the signature by the governor, and become law.
Well, there's some versions in the House that are misdemeanor. They're misdemeanor, not felony.
The whole bill is the felony bill.
The whole thing has been merged into one?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. What we're going to do is the next process, and all bills have to be sub-8, is meet with my two colleagues in government from the House side.
Well, nobody knows what sub-A means. You talk, you think you got to be sub-A. People go, wait a second. Do you know what sub-A means?
I do, but I've read a lot of legislation.
Right. I mean, it's like nobody knows.
It's the second
you think the
draft.
people coming to buy pizza know what sub-A is?
No. What happens is all bills are introduced in their original form, and by the time you go through the process of the General Assembly that starts in January, ends in June, bills are changed. There's new language, new language added, there's language deleted. So the bill becomes in its second form called a sub-A, and then sub-A2 is the third form, and the list goes on and on.
So it's the edits.
The edits,
the edits to the original idea.
So hopefully we're going to come to some sort of compromise, and the arguments are it shouldn't be a felony. Some people are saying it should be a felony. And look, we heard testimony, we heard opposing views from those that don't want it to be a felony and those that are supporting it to be a felony. And we're going to, it's still an ongoing debate.
Okay. Your principal argument against is?
Well, I don't think it should be a felony. And if it's not going to be a felony, then there really is other legislation or other laws in the book that cover it as a crime. So it really isn't necessary to pass anything to address it. We have disorderly conduct. We have manslaughter. If charges, if somebody were to die on the highway because of like some kind of reckless act, then manslaughter charges could be brought, as the many lawyers have testified, both at the Senate and the House. And so I don't see why we would need to increase the penalties, since there seems to be adequate penalties already on the books.
All right. Well, let's talk about the concepts with each other. Talk to each other.
Oh.
Just You know,
Basically, the problem is a public safety issue, number one. We just can't have individuals. We know there's freedom of speech. There's a constitution involved. People should have the opportunity to voice their opinions, to exercise their freedom of speech. But there's other places to do this. You can do it in front of the State House, you can protest, but not in a venue where you're also enabling individuals to be in harm's way. I mean, protesters come down that embankment, they slip and fall, and they fall in front of a motorist. They can lose their lives.
So your public safety concern, you think, elevates this to felony level? But
well, they shouldn't be protesting on a state highway. I mean, that's number one, and you have to send some sort of message that, look, it can't be allowed. Look,
Steve, you're not promoting the idea of,
No, I don't,
of
like I
laying
said,
across a highway in a barrel or whatever the heck they did in Boston.
Right. No, I like I said, I don't want to critique strategy, but at the same time, it's not something I would do, right? And I don't think it's something we would want to encourage. At the same time, there are laws in the books that do discourage this. And part of civil disobedience is that you intentionally go out and break a law, hopefully in a safe way, but you do that to call attention to a greater issue, which is what these highway protests were about. It was trying to call attention to a bigger issue, which is the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. So there's some worry about discretion here, right? Jess, can we play Senator Archambault's commentary from the hearing on Capitol TV? Listen to this.
I tend to be somewhat conservative in certain parts of my life, but in other areas I think you really need to jump over and play the devil's advocate. And here what my concern is, Senator, is I'm with you on protecting the public and the public safety. I'm with you. Have me hook, line, and sinker. My concern is the overly broad nature of this language. It opens the door to a subjective interpretation by a police officer as a complainant, and I was a police officer.
I'm completely. Was he talking to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
He talking to you? He was talking to you.
He was talking to me.
What's overly broad about the language, Steve?
Well, I think what he's looking at is like the same types of issues that happen with even disorderly conduct, where a police officer can say your conduct is disorderly and they can arrest you on that charge, whether it's real or not. It can just gives police officers a lot of discretion, a lot of ability to move things along if they think that it needs to.
So in this particular context, though, the language is too broad because it says what?
Well, what I think part of the original bill, I'm not sure how much it's been changed since, but it was like, causing any kind of distraction. It could literally be so much as like distracting any motorist on any highway or street. I know it's been amended somewhat to be just highways now, not streets.
Exactly, but
Right.
again, the debate is very important because there's two sides to a coin, and we want to make sure that we're going to also, matter of fact, don't allow protesting on the highway and protect the public and the livelihoods of the people that are using the state highway, because also it involves public safety, commerce, I mean, financial issues. You can cause a financial constraint on somebody, say they have an appointment to make up in Boston.
Stay with me here. What was your answer to Senator Archambault's? I know what mine would be. You tell me that a police officer can't figure out the difference between a nuisance lunatic and a formal protest across a highway?
Oh, police officer can. I mean, it's
so
the difference between somebody
what is he
hitchhiking.
talking
I mean, there's
about?
laws against
Well,
people hitchhiking on the highway too. I mean, you can't do it.
Providence has had 2 lawsuits about police telling people standing outside political events, handing out flyers. And both times those people have been told to move illegally by the police, and they've won one case and they're engaged in another case. So police officers often do overstep their discretion in the sense of like on First Amendment issues.
And you know what? I see the practicality of that. But laying or stopping traffic on an interstate highway is not a discretionary. You see, there's no. So I don't know what Steve Archambault is talking about, because you've been fair enough to say you know what a duck looks like when it's quacking. You know what a highway protest is when you see one. You know what a highway protest is. Your only argument is what the penalty ought to be.
Sure.
Right?
At a certain level, I think that right, exactly. And I think when we put strong penalties on it, what we're doing is there's going to be kids involved here whose lives are going to be hit with a felony conviction for the rest of their lives. There was a woman who was at the Senate hearing, Adele Bourne, and she's 80 years old now. In 1953, she was in the midst of the civil rights movement 16 miles away from Ferguson. So she was living in Missouri, 16 miles away. She said that if this law was passed when she was in high school, she would have a record a mile long. She talked about knowing, she said one of the advantages of being as old as she is that she knows civil rights leaders from all over the country who may have spent decades in prison instead of doing decades of good work. She mentioned a father in a Catholic priest in New Jersey who's 40 years serving the poor instead of being in prison.
Hold a thought on that. We'll continue the conversation when we come back. Stay with us.
I just want to say that I'm very concerned, just as you brought up, about the kind of language, the lack of judicial discretion. And I understand your concern about the highway. I have to take a friend to the emergency room time after time, and we go down I-95. But there are stops along the way that are not caused by protesters. They're just caused by what happens on I-95.
Yeah, well, that's called like a natural or accidental or weather-related or accident-related thing. That's the Del Bourne who you were talking about, the longtime protester. Listen, I respect anybody that had a civil rights role back in the day. But Selma, to your point, you argue on the Selma-ish type of thing. You're going to make a point to Steve's point prior to the break.
Well, the problem with this issue is what
By the way,
Del
hold on.
had
You know what? I did a bad thing here. I should tell everybody. We're talking about the Senator Rep. Takis' legislation to make it a felony for you to protest across a highway and stop traffic, a la post-Ferguson, as we've seen. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And the most important issue is you can't just pre-plan. Look, accidents, weather, those are not planned. Those happen. It's an act of God. It's nature. But the problem with these protesting is they're unannounced. They could be either maybe unannounced, pre-planned. It's something that you're going to cause a disruption. You're going to cause an issue with public safety. That's the problem here.
I'm with you.
Look, and the penalty, look, again, the debate goes on and on in the General Assembly. Piece of legislation goes out, sends a message, there's debate. Now, the hard part is going to be the compromise, is trying to find compromise language that's going to protect the public and at the same time allow those protesters to protest and...
But to the point that this good citizen was making, you buy that argument.
When she says that
things happen on the highway that slow people from going to the hospital. So this legislation jacketed to a felony is unruly because, well, other things happen that prevent people go to the hospitals. What?
Well, no, I think that point was a little fuzzy, but I think her greater point was that, people like her would have been lifelong felony convictions on their record.
Well, that's
they would have been in jail for a long time, and I think that was more to her point.
Let's talk more about that.
Yeah.
Because I know you think the stain of a felony conviction, even a charge, never mind a conviction, is way too much a lifelong burden for mostly young people who would think about coming across a highway. And
remember, part of the reason they're on the highway is they're complaining about the exact kind of over-policing that they're being subjected to. The ACLU just did a great report about, the prison, the school to prison pipeline. They talked about all the things that are happening to black and brown people in the state as far as being dismissed from school, as far as going to jail, as far as being over-sentenced. So we're adding yet another criminal charge when people are out there protesting.
Well, that's the motive for the last two stunts. But what Lou was working on here as a senator, he's trying to make this a felony thing. So the next cause du jour is not a highway protest. This, even though Ferguson and issues of race and police relationship with the community are at the root of what these last two highway protests have been. It could be protesting the Paw Sox in going to Providence. We start laying across 95.
But it would be a different type of people out there. It would not necessarily be people who are routinely, it wouldn't be black and brown people necessarily protesting the Paw Sox. It would be a different type of people. And
but it's the same message you want to send.
What is that?
You can't protest on the highway, whoever it is. The problem here is you don't cry fire in a crowded theater. You don't yell bomb on an airplane. There's a penalty. We don't do that every day. We just don't go tonight to the Showcase Cinema, wake up, or just stand up in the middle of the movie.
Don't give anybody ideas. No, but I know what you're saying.
But at the same time, this isn't a very common thing. This has happened once in Rhode Island. Well, maybe further back, it happened again in the 80s or 90s or something.
1991 during the DEPCO crisis. I think it happened off Jefferson Boulevard. There was a group of...
But it wasn't across an interstate completely.
Well,
wasn't the whole highway. It was access with the ramps.
Off-ramp on. It was the bypass, which is the 37 axis on-ramp to 37.
Wasn't a big enchilada like downtown 95 or downtown 93.
These are not common things. This happened up in Boston maybe once or twice, and it's happened in Providence once. It may happen again. I don't know who plans these, so I'm not sure if it would happen again or not. But I think we have people being dealt with in the courts right now. There are 3 people facing trial in March. There are 2 people who have already gone through the trial system. One got some pretty decent penalties. I mean, she's got probation for 6 months or a year. She paid a lot of money. She's going to be doing 100 hours of community service. This is not insignificant, and this is the type of thing that if she were to do it again now and be charged again, she could go to jail because they'll hold it as a second
And there's
offense.
different statutes too. Breaking and entering, it's 1 to 3 years. That's a felony. Forging checks is a felony. Shoplifting, second time, is a felony. And I think the balancing act here is, how do you send a strong message? How do the youth become responsible? Because look, we can't allow it. And Steve might have a point there, but you've got to send a message to the youth, even though they're young. Look, we're responsible. We just don't get behind the wheel and drive down Route 95 100 miles an hour, even though we just got our driver's license and we're only 16 years old. There's a message there, and the message is very crystal clear. Don't do it, number one, and if you do it, these are the penalties that you're going to have to face. We're not, I mean, like you said earlier, I don't think Steve's planning to have another protest, or his group or anybody's going to plan to do that. But you need a mechanism, a safety net to protect the public.
Yeah, I mean, isn't part of our criminal justice system and our penalties within it? They're multi-purposed. One is to punish, the other is to send message. And so you wonder how many of these kids would have done this in Providence and in Boston if they knew that they would have a felony record. You know, maybe they don't get so courageous.
Well, do we want to knock courage out of people who are trying to protest something they believe in? I mean, is that what we're looking to do?
We don't want. Here's what I thought is amazing to me, and Lou just said something a couple of minutes ago that I think really wraps up the show, which is, you just can't do that. There's a level of common sense past, like the line of common sense. Laying across a highway is like a what factor, and so so I get lost. You're a really smart guy, and I get lost in how much effort you put in to legitimize something that most of us say is so insanely dangerous.
I think it is dangerous, but I think it was also dangerous when people protested racism in the South. It's always dangerous when you protest things, and people were beaten and killed in the South, right? So that was insanely dangerous to do.
There's no doubt that, but you know what?
The other problem is they're losing the message too. When those type of acts happen, the public now doesn't support the cause. Now what's happening, and I think there was a Providence Journal poll, I think 90% that were polled were against what occurred on Route 95.
But that's
or
where
what occurred
Steve
in
and I agree.
1993.
You got no business strategizing with these people while you're trying to penalize them. You got no business. We all agree. In fact, you may even agree that the message got lost a little bit over.
And it did.
I think the best, but at the same time, though.
But that's not where you want to be. You shouldn't coach these people on the best way to get a message out while you're trying to penalize them for the act that they're about to or did commit, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
And basically, look,
you don't need to be their
bottom line,
consultant.
don't do it, and you're also endangering yourself and you're endangering others. And that's basically the message.
But the message does get lost in part because we focus on issues like this rather than focus on the message. I mean, there is a possibility here that the Senate could be considering bills that would do something about the underlying causes. Nobody would be out on a highway protesting if Rhode Island were the model for how to treat people with black and brown people by the police. We could do things about that. There are key pieces of there are ideas there that could turn into legislation.
What is the relevance of that point?
Well, because that's what they're out there protesting, right? So you're saying the message got lost, and I'm saying, well, there is a message there. We could find that message if we looked. We could find out what was it that they were on the highway protesting.
It's not my obligation or yours or Lou's or anybody watching the show to work hard to find out. It's your option. It's not your obligation.
The media doesn't do a good job reporting it. But I went out and I talked to a bunch of people.
That too has nothing to do with the essence of the conversation. So whereas you shouldn't be consulting them on good strategy, you shouldn't be talking about the nature of coverage of the message and the lost efficacy.
Okay,
this is about people laying across a doggone highway.
But if they're doing that, then you have to think no one is doing that for no reason. I mean, if they were doing it for no reason, I think we'd all agree that let's get some people some help. But do you understand? We're not saying these people are insane. We're saying these people have a cause that they're trying to promote, and because
wanna-
obviously
Hey,
no penalty would.
You know what?
Dispensable.
I'm this we stuff. No, I think they're temporarily insane.
But-
and a lot of them are under 25 years of age, and I still have one of those
me
that
too.
I'm bringing up, and their brains aren't completely formed.
But no amount of penalty would
All due
prevent them
respect
from
to my
doing what
daughter.
they were going to do.
All right, hold your thought. We got one more segment
sorry.
on this. Crazy. They are crazy.
I got two of them. 20.
Oh, yeah?
Many of our constituents who legally beg as a way to earn money between waiting for an SSI or SSDI decision or after their SNAP benefits run out at the end of the month, rely on that source of income to support themselves and their families during a tough time in their life. The definition of highway could include on and off ramps where folks are often panhandling, and we're very concerned that this behavior would then result in them having a felony, which, as you know, would cause severe barriers in them being able to attain housing that they can afford and support for themselves.
It is amazing to me at public hearings that the length of which people will go to make arguments that panhandlers are now going to be subject to felony charges for protesting across the highway. We know the difference between panhandling and protesting
On an
across the
overpass.
highway.
Exactly.
Right?
And that message was
you
totally
know the
lost.
difference.
Yes, I do.
I
But I
mean-
also know that their police can sometimes overstep their authority. We know that too.
Yeah, but that's what judges are for.
Mm-hmm.
The last time I checked, police officers don't arrest you and then you go right to jail forever. You
No,
might
I
go
know
to
that.
jail
And prosecute
temporarily.
you too. You have to go through the judicial process.
Yeah, I mean, the felony conviction sticks when a judge or a jury says it sticks, not when some.
But it's not an easy process to go through. I mean, not everybody can make bail. Not everybody's going to be treated the same in jail. I mean, for a person who's
But you can go
homeless.
into the slammer for a misdemeanor too. So I mean, I'm not so
That's right.
sure that the distinction argument plays
And
there.
that's the other issue, Dan, that there are misdemeanors with jail time. We've had a bill just recently, matter of fact, in today's newspaper about the tip issue. I mean, if there's fraud in tips, and that could be 60 days in jail. It is a misdemeanor, but misdemeanors can start from 1 day in jail all the way up
The
to 1
big
year.
distinction on felony for protesting across the highway, which is what we're debating, is judge's discretion will begin with minimum jail time, and it'll be a record on. It's a long time record between the so the misdemeanor, a judge can say, you know what, they'll waive the jail time. You want a minimum 60 days.
I'm not
of
saying
jail.
it could be 10 days, could be 5 days, but the issue here, Dan, is you have to have a message, number one. You have to have individuals to be responsible for their actions. And the problem here that I heard earlier from Steve is he wants youngsters to protest but don't suffer the consequences. But that's the big problem here.
All right.
So
So I think you've made your point, and your 15-second summary on this whole thing is what?
People are getting the punishments that they need. I mean, it's happening right now. It's happening. People arrested are paying
Well,
fines.
the term deterrent seemingly doesn't ring with the level of punishments that they're getting, but we'll see. Hopefully we don't have this protest problem in the future, and all this arguing is about nothing. Hopefully.
sends a message.
All right. Will you get a vote on this year?
We're hoping that we can come to some agreement between my colleagues in the House and the Senate, and they could possibly be a piece of legislation.
Well, thanks, guys, for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Final thought. We come back. Stay with us. You know, it seems a silly thing to be arguing about whether we should penalize at a felony level people who lay across a highway. To me, it just seems so obvious, but that's what makes America great. You can argue about the penalties, about arguing the issues. Hopefully, we don't have another one happen, and all this argument will be about a hypothetical problem. But it just cracks me up. Anyway, we got to go. We'll see you on the radio Monday noon on WPRO and back here at 7:30 as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.